Hello everyone and welcome back to the Artificial DM. So for today we've got a mishmash of a bunch of RPG horror stories. And being as this is going to be a little bit of a longer video, we're going to go ahead and get right into the stories. Be sure to leave your thoughts on the stories at the end of the video. This story is from Iliad44. Is it normal to be insta-killed? New to D&D for a few months now. Been playing with two groups and have noticed a problem where my player characters are singled out by the DM or group. So far, all of my character deaths have been insta-kills. The ones who are alive keep getting downed within one round. Example: Sorcerer player character casts Twin Haste on Paladin and Monk. Then Fireball group of archers next turn. I even pull off a counterspell on the BBEG. Then on his turn, the DM tells me I now have disadvantage on all saving throws. He then proceeds to cast two 8th level spells and one-shots my player character on the spot. The spells were so overkill that the second one would have killed me even if I saved and taken half damage. Now I get being upset at a group pooning encounters and wanting to ramp up the challenge. I started DMing myself, and I have tipped the scales to make a fight more challenging when I noticed the group stomping on my big baddie. However, this seems a bit excessive. He expressed his distaste for sorcerers, and in previous encounters my spells saved the group from his tactics. We even joked about how he wanted to kill my player character and ramping up the difficulty. After my player character died, the group's only interest seemed to be to loot his body. Funny enough though, throughout the entire game, the DM never once gave my sorcerer a single magic item or any gold. One of the other players was even glad he died, and openly wanted to kill him if given the chance. Even poisoned him on occasion, for what seemed to be for fun. This problem also extended out of combat, as NPCs seemed to be immune to illusion spells, and impossible to talk to if my player character tried to talk, even though he had a 20 in charisma. The other players would distrust my plans or completely ignore them. They even tied up my player character and gagged him when we went to talk to an important NPC. It would seem that them having a player character with a tragic backstory and a bit of edge makes this group want him dead. Even though he never once did betray the group or even cause problems. They just assumed that he would at some point. This whole experience has made me disinterested in playing D&D. Even before his death, I stopped trying to do his voice, and stepped away from the role-playing as to not to be shut down. My only role seemed to be their magic gimp, and targets to attacks from the DM, who despise casters. Makes me want to make a dumb barbarian and just roll to hit. Except for the fact that my last barbarian also was insta-killed. Long story, but suffice to say, 100 points of damage on a 3rd level barbarian seemed a bit much. I was going to say that this sounded like a scenario where the poster isn't telling us everything, but the fact that he got a lot of damage in on the BBEG, and then the DM tells him that he has disadvantage on all saving throws, and then just dumped a bunch of spells on him, it makes me wonder if it's really a problem with the player and the DM is trying to kick him out of the game without telling him he doesn't want him to play anymore. Or is it he's in a game with a very vindictive DM? He very well could be an edgelord. It's hard to tell with this story. This story is from Mommy Moke. The Tale of the Feet Guy. This story comes from about a year or two back. We were playing 5e over Roll20, and I should establish that most of these players were players I and the DM had played with before. Though only a few are really that important to the story, and I was actually barely involved. Only really there to witness it, and got involved near around the end. So, to establish who we have in this story, we have Feet Guy, who was playing a cleric to the moon goddess Saloon, a sheltered woman who lived in a temple for most of her life, and was described as beautiful as a full moon. We have the Warlock, who will be important. It should be mentioned that this Warlock is a gay man playing a woman character. This will be important later, trust me. We have me. I'm not that important until later, but I do come in eventually. And we have the DM, of course. Our campaign consisted of all of our characters joining an adventurers guild, and us going to take out a group of goblins, which my character was explicitly excited for, considering my character was a goblin tribe runaway who was found in the garbage that hated this specific tribe. Along the way, Feet Guy's character and the Warlock had fallen in love. Well, less love, more like Feet Guy just being a creep. Because the person playing Warlock thought it might have been an interesting character motivation, he opts for a sort of will they, won't they approach for this relationship. This was a really bad idea. A few weeks later, I get a message from Warlock on Discord stating that he's in a state of uncomfortability because Feet Guy is messaging him about the relationship between the characters and it got sexual very quickly. I don't think I really need to explain to you why it was so off-putting for a gay man to be forced to be describing theoretical lesbian sex. This is, of course, where the nickname Feet Guy comes in, as the majority of these aforementioned sexual descriptions were of the Warlock's feet. Additionally, there was a notable description of the Warlock using her magic to create a dildo of ice from Feet Guy, and to this day, the words ice dildo are still a meme among my group. I saw the words being written down and decided to take it to my DM, who promptly kicked him out. Looking back, we did not really notice the signs at the time, but Feet Guy really only showed very subtle hints of his depravity in our previous campaigns, like when he made a cowboy-style gunslinger in my campaign that tried to hit on a few NPCs, but nothing all too alarming, and he usually made his gunslinger the butt of the joke by saying the characters were super uninterested. I'm just kind of glad that we were able to get him out of our group before his depravity got to the usual levels of RPG horror story-esque depravity. I mean, what can I say aside from, "Your feet! Hand them over!" This story is from Teacup Koala. I used a green dragon to end my campaign. So this story is going to function like a confession, because this is a 2-year-old story about the worst mistake I've ever made as a DM. Since this is from my perspective, we're going to dive into what my thought process was as I made and designed these mistakes. Whether or not you think I'm a bad DM is up to you, but I would like to avoid any comments that are too harsh. So, shortly after his Aarakocra fell to his death, long story, my friend made a wizard character who he was very proud of. This player will be named President for this story. Now this was a jungle campaign, so after a character introduction, we got going into the story. As we were trekking, I found reasons to introduce some of my favorite monsters as random encounters, which made up most of the Hexcrawl game. But most of these monsters seemed intimidating, so President would encourage them to run and he would cast slow in every encounter. The spell spamming started to grate on me, because showing off cool monsters was my favorite thing in D&D, and the slow spell and the running caused me to waste a lot of monsters I'd really been looking forward to. This continued for about 4 weeks of gameplay. I tried to change up monsters that they wouldn't run away from, or make intriguing plot lines that they wanted to engage with, but they didn't seem interested, and seemed to want to steamroll their way to the end goal of the campaign, side quest be damned. While this had nothing to do with President's character, I internalized it as that character's fault. In reality, we just had different expectations, and I suppose mine changed sometime after Session 0 without my noticing. Regardless, it ended in tragedy. The 5th session with this pattern arrived, and I thought, I'm gonna throw a monster they can't run away from, and they can't cast slow on. So naturally, I threw a young green dragon at them. I gave it a water pool to hide in, and when I rolled stealth, it got like 24, enough to get a surprise round. For the purpose of fighting, I decided that it was mostly, but not entirely, feral, so it was lashing out like a wild animal. You know, exactly the opposite of how green dragons behave. It started the fight with a poison breath, which did about 50 damage to my party of level 7 players, knocking President unconscious. After the surprise round, we rolled initiative. It rolled a nat 20, no fudging required. So it went again. Oh, and it got its dragon breath up again, which it used to reduce the party to 10 or less HP, and to give President his first failed death save. That's when I had the young green dragon use its legendary action to make a tail attack. I publicly rolled a d6 to decide who it would attack, and unfortunately, it hit President, who died from the attack before he or the cleric even got a turn. I could have changed my mind, or chosen its attack's target, but in that moment, I just wanted to get rid of that pesky wizard who I thought was ruining my game instead of my own problems. This was when I realized that I'd been accidentally reading the wrong green dragon from the monster manual. Instead of using the young green dragon, I'd been reading the abilities of the ancient green dragon, and President figured it out from my reaction. But instead of fixing things, I decided to cover it up, lie about it, and keep the game going. The rest of the party managed to hide in a convenient, too small for the dragon, cave I whipped up, and the session ended with everybody pissed off. About this time, I'd realized what I'd done, but I felt powerless to take it back, which admittedly is also my fault. I always could have fixed it, I just failed to do so. The party managed to escape the dragon's territory in the next session, and with the new character in tow, continued the story. But my heart wasn't in it anymore, and I cancelled the campaign 4 sessions later. I still play with these people, since we're friends, and despite my failures, they were still sad that I cancelled the game. Now, I'm a player with them, a demotion I chose and that we're mostly happy with. President isn't always the best new DM, but who am I to judge? With this story, it's good that the DM was able to reflect on his past mistakes. But what he says at the end there, where he has been demoted, the thing about D&D is, yes, the DM is the one who puts in a lot of time to make the games come to life, but without the players, the DM is just writing a story. And without the DM, the players are just bored. No matter what your position is, or what position you fill, even in the game, you have value. Granted, if you're going around being a character who has no skills, isn't doing combat, and you're just whining about everything, that has no value. But, aside from that, anyway, what I see in this story is this OP could very well redeem themselves and try running games again. And I really think they should. This story is from Maddie Nevin. Brother-in-law throws a temper tantrum when his overpowered character doesn't get his way. TLDR. Brother-in-law makes an overpowered character, gets belligerent when I won't let him cheat when his character takes 2 HP of damage. Minor spoiler warning for Lost Mine of Fendelver. This story is about the first time my brothers and I tried to get into D&D 5e, only to have our brother-in-law ruin it by being a dick. Disclaimer. This is about the literal first time I ever DM'd, so I made some newbie mistakes. Please don't comment with how I should or shouldn't have handled the mechanics. It isn't the point of the story, and doesn't justify the dickheadery of my brother-in-law. Some quick backstory. My brothers, 4 of them, and I grew up as fantasy sluts. We played all sorts of RPG video games, read all sorts of fantasy books, drew all sorts of fantasy characters, watched all sorts of fantasy movies, etc. But we never, for some unknown reason, played D&D. So back in 2016, when I discovered the Adventure Zone podcast, I decided that it was time for us to try it out. I took on the task of being DM, since this was my idea. We met to discuss some of the rules and get through the grind of making characters, as some people who knew nothing about making characters, and set a future date to play. My brother-in-law caught wind of the event and offered to host the event, wanted to be a player character. I saw nothing wrong with this, as he did have tabletop RPG experience, and had some minis that we could use to help visualize our session. The story begins as we met up and did some pretty standard character introduction before playing. Brother-in-law explained that he used some sort of randomizer to roll his stats and gave his guy some basic armor. He showed me his character info, and even as a brand new player to the game, I knew that there was no way he should have the stats and equipment that he did. But I didn't know enough, and didn't want to spend too much time trying to correct all of this, so I let it go. We began the starter set adventure, Lost Mine of Fendelver, and quickly got on the first goblin encounter on the Tribor Road. Brother-in-law routinely attempted to make multiple attacks per round, and attempted to do things like rolling for kill shots, saying things like, "I want to swing my axe so that it cuts the goblin's head right off!" That would instantly kill the enemy instead of dealing damage. He would also attempt to do things like use his move speed to run into the enemy with his shield to knock them prone and deal damage. We all put up with this, as we were still having fun with each other, and couldn't directly correct him to put him into his place, because we were all still so unfamiliar with the rules and gameplay mechanics and whatnot. The things that we did challenge would cause him to sheepishly grin and acquiesce, signifying that he knew what he was doing was wrong, and he was trying to take advantage of our newness. It wasn't until we got to Kragmaw's hideout when he started getting ugly. As the player characters entered the clearing, he wanted to go over to the river running into the cave that had bushes on the far banks, which hid a pocketed clearing with some additional goblins keeping watch. Due to his heavy, much better than level 1 armor, I asked him to make a stealth check to see if he remained quiet enough to not attract their attention. Bad roll. I then asked him to make a dexterity saving throw as a mechanic to determine if I would be able to surprise his character. Another bad roll. When I told him what his bad rolls meant, he loudly protested that it was unfair to subject his character to this targeted treatment. Keep in mind, his player character was the only one over by the river. No one accompanied him. After complaining for what seemed to be an hour, he finally accepted that his character would be surprised for the first round of combat. The first goblin performed a standard attack with its bow, and I rolled a 19 against his AC. When asking what his AC was, he said a number too low, to which I replied that I hit him. He protested, saying he forgot to add some bogus bonus to armor class, and produced a new number. Still a hit. He protested a second time, saying he forgot to add a different bogus bonus to AC, and produced a third number. Still a hit. His agitation was visible as I rolled for damage. 2 HP. Yes, you read that correctly. No, it wasn't a typo. 2 hit points. He flew off the handle, calling me a cheater, a douchebag, a total dick who was clearly targeting his player for no reason. It kept coming and got increasingly aggressive. At this point, I was personally finding joy in his anger, as he had made the night unpleasant from the very beginning, and calmly replied that his character could handle to lose the hit points. After his fit, some of my brothers started talking about how late it was getting. It wasn't, and a few rounds of combat later we decided to pause for the evening. It is also worth mentioning that his level 1 character had almost 30 HP. Oh my gosh. To this day, a couple of my brothers have zero interest in playing again. It should go without saying that I have never attempted to include him in any other sessions. This story is sad because OP was trying to introduce their brothers to this wonderful game, and their brother-in-law, who apparently has some experience, turned out to be a massive that guy. I'd be surprised if the brother-in-law actually does play any more D&D, especially if he throws a temper tantrum like that. So, what did you guys think of these stories? Be sure to let me know your favorite down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a like. If you have a story to share, you can click on the description and find all the information on how you can share your tale, or even recommend to me a story that you found. Hope you all enjoyed, and until next time, hope you feel inspired.